here, Cedar Creek, and I am very pleased to introduce to you Ilse, and she is from Monarch Watch, and she'll be giving her presentation today on attracting butterflies with
So just a couple of items first. I have the Monarch table in the main room, and I have lots of handouts, also for general for some plant lists and things for general for butterflies. But if you want to have any information, I didn't know where to put things here. So I have handouts there, and I'll be there all day. So off and on, I'd be able to answer questions if you have questions. And today I'll start out with, first I'll start out with a couple gardens that I put in, so you can see examples of what a native garden could look like, and also how I started them. One was started with seeds, and the other one was started with plants. So the first one I started as an Earth Day project with 3 second grade classrooms at the Gilkey Elementary School in Plainwell. And they wanted to have an Earth Day project and wanted to start a butterfly garden. So on the right over there's the Kalamazoo River. The school is over on this side. And this is where we use the sod stripper that I mentioned earlier to you. We stripped the sod off of this area. And unfortunately, what we found out, it was rather hard to do because right next to the river, this was floodplain once, and when they built the school, they filled it in with construction debris. So once we tried to get the grass off, we ended up with a lot of big chunks of cement and stuff that we had to dig up, and then we had to bring in some topsoil to fill that whole area in. This was done with some of the school volunteers. And following the preparation of that, we took some 5-gallon buckets, and we made these we mulched around the buckets, because we were going to have 75 second graders. And we had, I made up little cups with seeds, one for each child. And so they each were going to get a little plot where they could put the seeds in. So we had 75 of these little spots for the seeds. There's a close-up. And then what we did is I labeled each cup with a number and had a flag in each little plot with a number. So the kids had to, they had to look at the number on their cup and find their little plot where they got to plant the seeds. And here I'm giving them instructions. My husband always takes the best part of me in every picture. Anyway, I gave instructions on how they should put the seeds in, just put them on there and work them in lightly into the ground. And then they had to find their little spots where they had to plant them, and that was like herding cats or whatever. And then afterwards they had to assemble again and go back to their classrooms. And so the first summer looked like this. And those were all essentially annual weeds. And they were so big and had big roots that we didn't pull them. Instead, we just cut them off at the ground level, because they were annual weeds. So in order not to disturb those little plots, we just cut them off, and this is what it looked like after we removed the weeds. But a couple years later, this is a picture, one of the pictures of what the garden started to look like. It looks a lot more filled in now, but so that was the one we started with seeds. You can tell here not everything completely came up, so I just kept adding plants as the first fall and the next spring. I added some more different plants to it, but a lot of the seeds also came up as the plants grew. And the other garden that I started was at the Wolf Lake Fish Hatchery Visitor Center. And that's a place where we started with plants, actually little plugs that you can buy when, you know, at the native plant sales. And this was the area outside the visitor center that people just always walked over this scruffy lawn here. It's very ugly. So we decided we would put a garden in there. And we just, actually through the garden there's a little path that divides. We started out with half of it first. Money constraints, you know, for nonprofits. So we started out with half, put a little path in, and started the other half the next year. So this is, you know, 3 years later, a very nice butterfly garden.
So does it look like that still now?
Yes, yes, it looks a lot like that. Now, what happens is, because plants reseed themselves, you know, so sometimes the plants move around. They don't always, you know, the garden looks different every year, but it always looks lots of flowers blooming.
So once they're established, they're pretty well set, no matter whether it's the same ones or not.
Right,
Yeah.
they'll move, you know, most of these are perennials. There's only a couple that are, there's one species I think that is not, that's a biennial that's in there. But they're perennials, but some of them have died back. When we had a real bad drought 2 years ago, the swamp milkweed died. So, because this doesn't get watered. And I'll talk, these are just a couple of examples I wanted to show you of gardens that you can do. And now I'll go into why the native plants and all of this.
Ilse,
Yes.
once you have the garden established, how much maintenance and weeding of non-wanted plants do you have to do?
And not a whole lot, especially in this case because there's cement all around it. Cement sidewalk all around it. So not that much comes in. And we removed the sod that was there, that scruffy sod, we removed it with that, you know, sod stripper. And so there wasn't a whole lot of weed seeds that came up. And we mulched right away. So if you mulch right away, there's a lot less chance of having the weed seeds germinate. This is just another view of the garden there. And there's a program by Monarch Watch that I'm involved with that if you have gardens or even big fields or whatever, the milkweeds and nectar plants, you can register them as Monarch waste stations. And I have waste station brochures, you know, in the other building. And so we registered both of these gardens as waste stations. They're also both Monarch Lava Mountain Project sites that get monitored all summer long every year for the usage by monarchs. So, and again, I have information on that in the other building. So why do we want to use native plants versus the exotics? By exotics, I mean, you know, whatever. Yeah, I don't know anything about horticultural plants, you know, the kinds that you buy at the regular nurseries. I know a lot about native plants, but I don't know anything about tulips and roses and anything like that. So, so I call those ones that you buy at the nurseries exotic. They're not really, by native, I mean, these were here before a settlement. Basically our native flora. So why would you want to use native plants? Well, they really require less care. They're and they require less care because they're adapted to our climate and to our soils. They're more disease resistant. You don't have to use pesticides on them or herbicides, you know, pesticides on them all the time. You don't need to fertilize them. And you need very little watering. as I said, the drought 2 years ago never got watered, the garden never got watered, and we did lose the swamp milkweed because it just got too dry. We had kind of planted it, so the garden had a slight slope, so we put it at the bottom of that slope, but there just wasn't any rain, you might remember, for weeks on end. And the swamp milkweed usually if you just plant swamp milkweed and water it during a drought maybe once a week, you'll be fine. But so you might lose a few, but
they grow very, very fast though.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
replace them.
Right. So, and in general, the native plants are less aggressive than the exotics, and because they're being kept in check by our native insects. And now, for example, probably most of you are familiar with garlic mustard and how aggressive it is in our woods, and how they kill up all the native plants by crowding them out. So native plants are just less aggressive. Some of them are more aggressive than others, but they are not as aggressive as some of the invasive plants, the invasive exotics. In general, the root structure, especially of the prairie plants that were planted in those gardens, are better at several things. They anchor, improve the soil better. They prevent runoff, and they replenish the groundwater, and they sequester carbon. And I'll go over. So here's the reason why they do all these things. This right here is lawn grass. You can see there's hardly any roots. There's hardly any structure above the ground for wildlife habitat. There's lots of here, but certainly no wildlife habitat in there. And then the native plants have these deep roots, and they funnel the water down along the root system, and so they replenish the groundwater, and they purify the water as it percolates through the soil. Some of these go down 15 feet, like compass plant goes down 15 feet. And the reason these do well in fairly drought conditions is because they have these deep root systems, because 15 feet down they're going to find water. So that's why you don't have to water the native prairie plants as much as you would have to with the regular horticultural plants. And we can see all of this structure above ground here, and in all of this root structure, there's carbon stored in all of those. There's not much carbon stored in lawn grass. So that's one of the reasons why we like to promote gardening with native plants. So native plants also support a greater number and a greater species diversity of insects than the exotics do, and thereby we preserve our native biodiversity. Even the cultivars, the cultivars are really developed for the human visual impact. You know, why do you have to have a white purple flower? You know, just because people like to have different colors, I don't know. But so the cultivars quite often also don't have the nectar that the original plant does. So there's several reasons you probably want to use the original plants versus the cultivars. Now, insects, they use the petals of flowers as landing strips when they want to get nectar out of the flowers. They have nice little landing pads there. Well, they come across one of these and they kind of wonder, how do I land on that? You know, plus insects have, you know, like the butterflies, they have, they see, their eyes are composite, and so they see colors different than we do. So they may come across a cultivar, let's say you have a purple cornflower, and they know what that looks like. They come to a white one, they don't see that color the same way we do. So therefore, they may not recognize it as a nectar plant for them. So why am I promoting insects? Well, the insects are what pollinate the flowers, flowering plants. Therefore, you without pollination, you don't have seed production. And the seeds are not only good for plant propagation, but also they are the food source for many species, including humans. Insects are especially important to, say, birds, because they almost exclusively feed insects to their young. While the adult birds may eat fruit or seeds, but to their young they mostly feed insects because they're high protein source. So now we get to the butterflies. Now that I've indoctrinated you on why. So butterflies are an insect order Lepidoptera, and that means that they have scales on their wings. They have a set of forewings, a set of hind wings, and they have a head. Right behind the head is a thorax and then the abdomen. And they have two antennae. And you can tell the difference between butterflies and moths, usually by the antenna. The butterflies have these little knobbies on the end, and moths are usually kind of feathery antennas. And they have 6 legs, and the eyes are compound versus, non-compound. I'm not coming up. Ours, only single vision, and they have a proboscis. And I'll get to the proboscis later. So, some of the caterpillar, because you don't have butterflies without caterpillars. The anatomical features of the caterpillars, they have a head, they have short antennae. These up here are not antennae. The antennae are the ones that down here. These are just what they call tubercles, and different caterpillars have different looking tubercles. So they have this head, and they have simple eyes, that's the word I was looking for, versus compound eyes. The caterpillars have only simple eyes, and they have very strong chewing parts, because that's the stage that eats eats the vegetation. So they need strong chewing parts. And they have a thorax, which is this front part here, and an abdomen. The thorax is where the true legs are, and then these legs back here are called prolegs. And they have a thing that's called spiracles, and that's these little oval things here. That's the air that the caterpillar breathes through. That's how they get air. They don't have lungs or anything. They just breathe through these little spiracles. So butterfly life stages. I've touched on that a little bit. So the first one is egg, and then the caterpillar. The pupa, which in the case of butterflies is usually called a chrysalis. And then you have the adult butterfly. Some examples of eggs. This is the monarch egg. This is the egg of our red admiral on a leaf of nettle. This is the smallest pin, straight pin that I could find, with those tiny little heads that some of those straight pins have. Well, this little egg is smaller than, a quarter of that size. So those eggs can be really, really small. These are the eggs of a question mark. They stack them up. I've seen pictures where they've had 5 of them stacked on top of each other. Usually when you find a whole bunch of eggs like this, it's more likely a moth that laid those eggs. And there's a moth called yellow bear. And because usually the butterfly eggs are laid more and more, more singly, or not in large groups like this. So it's hard to find butterfly eggs. Caterpillars have what is called instars, and this example here, it's the monarch. As caterpillars eat and grow, they outgrow their skins. And here you can see, it's a little bright in here, but right behind it, they kind of crawl out of their skin and leave the skin behind. Yeah, you can see that dark area there. That's the skin that it just has sloughed off. And so here are your 5, well, here's an egg actually, how small it is. And here's your first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And you learn how to distinguish which instar they are by, not necessarily by size. Remember, these are both second instars, but you look at the length of what is called the tubercles in comparison to the size of the caterpillar. So the 5th instar is really long ones, and these are a little bit shorter. And you know, the small ones, the tubercles go just barely beyond the head, whereas these are really long. So.
Is there a time frame for that, or is it vary?
Okay.
Just for the instars, I mean, does it vary on
Yeah,
food
well,
amount?
in the monarch, I'm real familiar with
Okay.
with the time frame. The egg stage is about 4 to 5 days. The caterpillar stage is about 2 weeks. The pupal stage is about 10 days. So metamorphosis, though, is temperature dependent. So, you know, early spring when you find things are kind of slow. It takes longer. In midsummer, we don't turn the air conditioning on until it's close to 80 degrees in our house. So monarchs just zoom right through. You know, they come out after 8 or 9 days out of the chrysalis stage, and the caterpillars are speeded up too, whereas in the fall, caterpillars can take 20 days, whereas usually during the summer it takes a week. So it's, and different butterflies have just different lengths in their life stages. And I'm not sure I've ever kept track exactly how long each, you know, I just know the monarchs really well.
So that instar though, that happens like every couple days?
And again, sometimes it can vary.
Yeah.
You know, the people that have really studied them, they say, well, the first instar 1 to 2 days, and then it says 3 to 4 days, but it varies. Usually the big ones, the 5th instars, take about 4 days, so they eat a lot of leaves. So the chrysalis stage, in this case the monarch again, the caterpillar, when it's ready to form its pupa, it finds a place that it figures is safe to go through, because the pupal stage is, you know, a sedentary stage. The egg and the pupa stage is sedentary, whereas the 2 stages, the caterpillar can move around, the butterfly obviously can. So they need to find a place where they feel they can attach themselves and feel safe. And in the case of the monarch, they make a little silicone pad, stick their hind end into it, and then they hang like that for 24 hours. At that point, there's a conversion gone inside of there, and they slough their skin the last time, and underneath is the chrysalis. At first, the first half hour, it's a little bit more elongated, because you can see it's quite long, but it kind of shortens up a little and changes shape a little bit, but essentially this is underneath the skin already. And then just before the butterfly comes out, in the case of the monarch, you can already see it. The outside turns clear, and you can see the monarch inside. So that's the chrysalis stage. And then the butterflies come out, and they all pretty much do the same thing. They come out and they have small wings and they have a big abdomen. There's a liquid in the abdomen that they pump into the wings to expand them. And then when they're fully expanded, you see the abdomen is completely hidden by the butterfly. So that takes about 30 minutes for that to happen. And then the butterfly usually has to hang around like that for 3-4 hours. For those wings, they're very soft at first and they need to harden. And that takes several hours. Quite often the butterflies will come out first thing in the morning. By the time it's warm enough, 3-4 hours later, their wings are set and they can fly. Butterflies usually only fly at temperatures about 60 or so. So what are really the essentials for what do you really need to have in your garden to attract the butterflies? Well, you need the caterpillar food plants and you need nectar plants. Well, how long do I have to?
Got it, 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So caterpillars, as I say, they can be fussy eaters. The monarch will only eat plants in the milkweed family, and this is the swamp milkweed that needs a little bit more moisture than, say, the common milkweed. But they only eat plants in the milkweed family. Now the black swallowtail, they're the ones that eat the plants in the parsley family. So this one will eat the queen anne's lace, like we mentioned earlier. And this one will also be on your parsley or your dill. You know, a lot of people, when they say, oh yeah, I found lots of monarchs on my parsley. I said, well, monarchs don't eat parsley. They're black swallowtails. So, you know, they both have black on it, right? And they have stripes, so. Now, a very good native plant in the parsley family is the golden alexander. So, and it's rolling down is also a very good nectar plant. So here's some more fussy eaters. The Baltimore caterpillar will only eat essentially just the host plant is the turtle head. This is kind of more of a wetland plant. The American lady eats plants in the like sweet everlasting. They also eat pussy toads, but this one here is sweet everlasting. A little bit less fussy eaters are like the morning cloak, which uses several tree species, and the red spotted purple, again, several tree species. This caterpillar looks very much like the one I showed you earlier, which was of the viceroy. I've had two of them next to each other, and I've had a hard time distinguishing them at the caterpillar stage. But the butterflies are totally different. So I go through some of the families of butterflies and through the different life stages. This is the caterpillar of the giant swallowtail. The host plants for those hop tree, prickly ash, and rue. Now rue is a non-native species, but I have some because both the black swallowtail and the giant swallowtails will eat the rue. And I say people, that's okay. You may not have enough room for a hop tree in your yard. And most people don't want a prickly ash thicket in their yard. So, you know, I make an exception with a non-native plant in the case of rue, but it's not very invasive. But it does seed real well, so you might have to pull up some extra plants, but it's not spread by roots. So here you've got the caterpillar. You know, some of these caterpillars look kind of like bird droppings, so we call these the bird dropping caterpillars. And then all the swallowtails attach themselves, you know, the monarch, remember, it just kind of attached himself from the top and kind of hung upside down, you know, hung with the J form. Well, the swallowtails all attach themselves the bottom on a twig or whatever substrate they attach themselves to at the end on one side, and then they spin these little like a little harness, and you can see it right there. So this is the pre-pupal stage. Just like in the monarch, it was the jade, and this is the pre-pupal stage of the swallowtails. And then this is the pupa. This is just another picture of it. And this is the underside of the giant swallowtail, and then this is the upper side. This is our biggest butterfly that we have in Michigan, the giant swallowtail. Spice bush swallowtail. Again, it looks kind of like a little bird dropping in the early stages. Then when it gets in the later instars, it looks like this green. And just before it makes a chrysalis, it turns this yellow color. And you can see here it attaches itself just like the other, like the giant swallowtail. Attaches itself down here and then it forms a little harness. Here is the chrysalis. And then the spicebush swallowtail butterfly on purple coneflower, pale purple coneflower.
Are there other caterpillars that eat spice bush?
Yes,
Oh, darn.
the promethean moth caterpillar. The promethean moths also eat spicebush.
Something ate a lot of my
Well, there's
spice
probably
bush.
other things that eat them too, but I know that one of the host plants for the promethean moths is spicebush.
It's interesting that,
Something found fine last summer.
I just want to add the male Promethea actually flies in the afternoon, and it actually looks just like a spice bush when it flies, so it's very, you know, it can confuse you, but they're,
Yeah. Yes, it
very
does have,
cool.
the colors are, it's dark brown.
Yeah, it's pretty
really
much
dark
just black,
brown, but
yeah.
It's just black, but yeah. Right. And then this is just a little picture of the spicebush. I think the spicebush is a native shrub, and it just has really pretty red berries. And of course, birds love the berries, so spicebush is an excellent plant. It's kind of more of a understory plant, so you probably don't want to have it in full sun, but yes.
Where would you get a hold of one of those? I've been looking forever, and it's never something you see in the nursery.
Well, we have native plant nurseries in the Kalamazoo area. There's
Oh.
one in Pawpaw that is selling them, but probably also in Savannah.
Oh, okay.
And I, actually, if you come see me,
Okay.
I have a brochure in one of those. It's an old brochure, so it's not up to date.
Sure,
but
sure.
It's, it's a way of source of where to find things.
Okay, very,
And you can look on their webpage.
yeah.
Okay, tiger swallowtail. Now, most of you probably know, the tiger swallowtail with bright yellow butterfly. Here's the early instar of the caterpillar and the later instar. Changes somewhat, varies a little bit. And here again, your chrysalis. Now, I found it very interesting here. The head actually is right underneath there. This is not the head. This is actually the thorax. The head is right hidden underneath there. But it has these spots. And they say, it probably, the bird sees it, thinks it's a snake or something.
Very small.
But I found it very interesting when I looked at the picture of this. You see these two spots? They seem to be about the same place are on the caterpillar. So I never observed it actually until I saw it in the picture. So then, the next stage, of course, is the butterfly. Now, the tiger swallowtail is an unusual butterfly because it has, when you see a yellow one, it can be either a male or a female. But the female has a dark morph. So this one here is definitely a female. This one, you don't know whether it's a female or a male because the female can be either dark or light. So most of the time, the females all look like females and the males look like males. And a lot of butterflies, you cannot tell the difference between the male and the female by looking at them just, at the butterfly. You have to dissect them to find out whether they're male or female. But in the monarch, you actually can tell them apart. Some others you can. And in this case, if you have a dark tiger swallowtail, it's a female. This is the black swallowtail that I mentioned earlier that eats your Queen Anne's lace and your parsley. There's your caterpillar again attached here. This has two colored in the chrysalis stage. Most often, the ones that you find in the summer are green, but not exclusively. And in the fall, they're usually tan, but again, not as exclusively. There's some way that they can decide what color they're going to be by the amount of light and the reflection of the substrate that they're on maybe. And a good host plant of the native plants would be the golden Alexander. And this is a male, and this is the female. The female has all this blue on it, and the male does not. This is the Baltimore, the host plant I mentioned earlier is turtlehead, the caterpillar, real pretty little chrysalis. Here's the turtlehead, and the upper side and the lower side. A lot of butterflies have the upper side and the lower side look totally different from. So, you know, it's helpful and sometimes in identifying if you, especially if you can see both the upper and the lower. But some of the real small butterflies get really hard to tell apart. Red Admiral, here's the famous little egg. They do a funny thing is, this is the caterpillar, but even when they're tiny, absolutely tiny, they somehow fold nettle leaves up like this, and they spend their time inside of a folded up nettle leaf, and they just chew some of the leaf, and as they grow, sometimes they outgrow a leaf that the little one that the egg was left on, and then they just have to incorporate several leaves to cover themselves up. And the chrysalis, and here the red admiral, the upper and the lower, so you can see they are different again. Here we got the viceroy, and it has two color morphs in the caterpillar, and the green and the tans. And the best viceroy looks a lot like a monarch, except the monarch does not have this line through the hind wing. So, and it's a little smaller. Common question marks, the two butterflies are very similar looking. So here you have the caterpillar of the common, the question mark, and here are their chrysalises. They look very similar. And here are the two butterflies. They actually have both of them have two color morphs, one more in the brownish and one more in the tannish. But the way to tell them apart is you need to see whether they have a little comma or whether they have a little question mark. So it is kind of hard sometimes in the field to distinguish them. It's easy when if you have them in the hand, or if you have them just come out of a chrysalis like these guys did, then you can see it. But in the field, it's not always easy to see. But this is the one that I showed you the eggs. This is eggs that the caterpillars came out of, and here are the empty eggshells. And so then they go through different color stages, and you can see how the different instars look differently. And the American lady, that is the one, the host plants are everlastings or pussy toes. Got the caterpillars, the chrysalis, and again, upper and lower are completely different looking. Variegated fritillary. This is the one that first time I found variegated fritillary caterpillars was 2 years ago. I don't know whether that's more of a southern butterfly, whether because of our changing climates, whether all of a sudden they're expanding their range. But their host plant are violets. I think it's a real attractive caterpillar. Those really don't sting on this. They just have little. They look like stingers, but they don't. But you don't really want to handle them very much, yes.
Would you happen to know how specific they are in terms of the species of violet?
No, I think they'll eat any violets, but they'll eat some other things too.
Okay.
Yeah, passion vine. Okay, so they'll eat some of these other ones. I've had somebody tell me that lived in the south part of Kalamazoo County that had one of those. before I found one at our house, and hers was on passion vine.
Oh,
So they'll even eat apparently Mayapple, so. And then skippers are a whole group of very small little butterflies. The only one that's any size is this one, the silver spotted skipper, and that's because of that spot there, and that's the caterpillar, that is caterpillar. But there are a lot of these little guys that look like this. They have some that are very, you know, they have a pattern that you can kind of tell what it might be, but some of them are just very hard to distinguish. And my husband worries about those. I don't. They're out there, that's great, but I'm not going to try to identify them. But let him take some pictures and then I can show them, right? And they have a lot of skippers, their host plants are grasses. And in the case of the silver spotted skipper, host plant is legumes. So we have that around a lot because we have, unfortunately, we have a bunch of black locust trees around. But those are kind of invasive. Now, I mentioned proboscis earlier. That's really what it has. It's this little spiral straw. It's like a straw, you know, a drinking straw, except it's spiral. And it can unfurl it, and that's what the butterflies use to drink the nectar out of plants. And this is a great spangled fritillary ant, this milkweed plant. So I think we get to the point where we're actually going on, okay? One of the things that butterflies do is they do a thing called puddling. And you probably maybe have seen some of this if you drive down during the summer on a dirt road and all of a sudden you see a bunch of butterflies maybe near a puddle. The water in a puddle has dissolved some minerals, and the butterflies need those minerals. So all of these different ones are getting the moisture with the dissolved minerals in them. They probably get enough moisture in the nectar, but they do need the minerals. Okay, now we go through some of the plants that you might want to plant. For early spring, you want to plant things so that we have things flowering from spring to fall. So early spring flowering plants are the golden Alexander and then the lupin. And these really attract a lot of the bumblebees come out really early in spring, and you can we have lots of bumblebees over the lupin in the yard.
Both of those plants need open sunlight.
Most of these really need sunlight, yes. All the milkweeds are excellent nectar plants. Well, not only for the monarchs, but for all the butterflies. You got this swamp milkweed here with the
skipper.
little
The
skippers
smell
on them. And you got the monarch, and then here you've got the viceroy. This is the butterfly weed, the common milkweed. This likes it a little bit more moist. Butterfly weed really likes it dry. You can kill that by overwatering. And the common milkweed grows in almost any conditions. And this is the one that spreads. But if you have just a kind of a wild area, yes.
I was just wondering if you've ever had trouble, let's say, finding a caterpillar on one type of milkweed and then trying to switch it to another one, or just changing food plants on a caterpillar?
On the milkweeds, the monarchs prefer to lay their eggs on common milkweed first, swamp milkweed second, and butterfly weed third. So sometimes if you find them on one species of milkweed and want to switch them over to another one, they don't all like to switch. But some, I've had some that haven't wanted to switch from common to butterfly weed. But I found really big fat 5-inch star caterpillars on butterfly weed and eating them. So sometimes they can get fussy on switching them over. But they will lay them on but the preferred one is really the common milkweed. Next to the nectar plants are the pale purple, the purple coneflowers, the pale and purple, the regular purple coneflowers. Blazing stars, several species of blazing stars that you can, that are native to Michigan. Those are very good nectar plants. Blue vervain is, prefers a little bit wetter, but it likes, lots of butterflies like it. Of course, black-eyed Susans, which are, the mainstay of a lot of gardens. And in this case, this is ironweed. Again, this likes it a little bit wetter, but, in a garden situation where you can maybe, in a drought time, where you can water them once a week, when you don't have any rain for 2 or 3 weeks, and then, any of these plants will do just fine. Wild bergamot is really liked really well liked by butterflies. And there's actually 2 of them there. There's one, I think, down below. And pasture thistle, they also like the bull thistle and the Canada thistle, but those are really invasive plants. But there is a native species, there's several native species, one of them being pasture thistle, the other one marsh thistle, that they really like the nectar plants. And then there is butterfly bush, which is really a good nectar plant, but it is not native. It has turned invasive in some states as far north as New Jersey. So I have one butterfly bush. It's surrounded by the house, by the patio, by a cement. It's completely, it can't get out of there. And I deadhead the flowers. So it's not going to invade our yard. It's going to stay right there. So, but it's right where I can look out our kitchen window, and it really brings the butterflies in. But I'm just very careful so it doesn't spread. And this is actually one of these, what they call the hummingbird moths. It's a sphinx moth. So very clearly. People always think, oh, look at that small hummingbird. Well, it really is, it acts like a hummingbird. It really is just a moth. It isn't, not just a moth, it's a moth. I mean, I love moths. I don't want to say just a moth. Pieweed is excellent nectar plant. Boneset. Pieweed and boneset like a little bit moisture, but they'll do okay in a garden setting. Asters and goldenrods, and I don't have a picture of a golden butterfly and a goldenrod. I just realized that the other day, and I have to make sure I get them on this year. Asters and goldenrods are your mainstay in the fall. That's what the monarchs feed on as they migrate south. So, plus all the other butterflies love asters and goldenrods. So you really want to incorporate both of those species. Well, there's lots of different kinds of asters, so any of the aster species should be fine. And goldenrods, again, lots of goldenrod species. There is such a thing as mimicry in butterflies, and in this case here, the mimicry between the monarch and the viceroy. Milkweed plants have poisonous substances in them that the monarch caterpillar can eat fine, and it stores these toxic substances in their body all the way through the chrysalis stage into the butterfly stage. So if you get a bird that's just out of the nest, doesn't know what's good to eat, because up to then the parents have been bringing it all its food. So they come down, a nice fat caterpillar, and they chomp down, it really makes them sick. So they learn not to eat monarch caterpillars, and they also learn not to eat monarch butterflies. And they always thought that the viceroy was protected from bird or, predators because it looked a lot like the monarch. But they found out that the viceroy caterpillar eats willows, and willows have toxic substances in them, and they're different though from the monarch ones. And it actually protects them, those toxic substances protects them from the willow, protects them. So they really reinforce each other. The birds learn not to eat either one, not just because one is toxic, but because both of them are. And then of course you got camouflage. Quite often, sometimes you see a butterfly and then it disappears, and you kind of wonder where it went. But it may be sitting against a tree trunk, or it may be on the ground, and it's hard to see that right there. That's of course to escape from predators. And predator. What happens with insects in general, there's one of the biggest predators of insects are other insects. And some of the predators on caterpillars can be these predatory stink bugs. In this case, they have these long snout-looking things, and they just pierce the skin of the caterpillar and then kind of suck out the insides of the caterpillar, and that's what they eat. In both of these cases, that's the case of the red admiral. But it keeps, if our environment wasn't so messed up, it just the natural process of keeping populations in check. It'd be nice to have lots of butterflies, but if there weren't, if they didn't have predators, and maybe we wouldn't have any milkweed stuff because all the milkweed would be eaten by the monarch caterpillar. So you need to have your natural predators. There's also parasitism, which is different from a predator. There's, for example, a fly called a tachinid fly. It looks a lot like our housefly. Well, what they do is they lay their eggs on a caterpillar, and when their eggs hatch, they kind of penetrate the skin, and they grow inside the caterpillar. The caterpillar is just munching away, eating, growing, but eventually the fly larvae inside kill the caterpillar, and they come out as these little fly larvae. These are the fly larvae, little maggots. You probably all have seen maggots. And then it makes a little pupa like this. And in this case here, it came out, not just out of the caterpillar, but here it came out of the chrysalis. So this is one of the examples of parasitism in the case, this is a frequent one in the case of monarchs. And you can have these wasps that parasitize caterpillars. There's two different species. And the bigger one came out of the chrysalis of a spicebush swallowtail, and then the smaller one came out of the chrysalis of an American lady. So, you sometimes have a nice little chrysalis, and you think you're going to have a butterfly, but unfortunately, we can get wasps. In this case here, those are fairly good-sized wasps, the ones I just showed you, but there's some real tiny wasps that parasitize. And in this case here, remember I told you about how the red admiral folds up the nettle leaf and grows inside of there. Well, I have picked some of those leaves and found a small little caterpillar in them, and usually after a few days they come out and maybe look for a fresh leaf or something. But in this case, nothing was coming out of a leaf, and so I opened up the leaf and looked inside, and this is a little cocoon of a wasp that just the wasp larva completely ate the caterpillar, and that made a little cocoon. In this case, this is another wasp. They laid the eggs on this Baltimore caterpillar, and then the last wasp larva came out, and they made this foamy stuff. And then eventually these tiny little wasps So again, this is Subway. These wasps have actually been introduced to some extent to control gypsy moth populations, which is, of course, a non-native moth which really likes to eat oak leaves and can denude our oak trees. Yeah.
Just wondering if you have a species of nettle that's not stinging. Do you grow that? In your garden?
Nettles.
Oh, nettles.
Nettles, yeah.
Well, there are some, there's a wood nettle that grows in the shade. Okay, the stinging nettle is non-native species. It just happens to grow, on our property profusely. And, yeah, wood nettle is a native species.
So you're not planting stinging nettles in your yard?
Pardon me?
You're not planting the stinging nettle in your yard?
No,
Okay.
no, these are actually grow in our, we have a very wild yard. There was a lot of stuff growing there. I don't know where it came from. I mean, it was there when we bought the property, besides acres of lawn. So, yeah, no, we don't see that, but if you have it, you don't necessarily have to yank it out. I don't yank it out, because it is the host plant for, actually not only for the red admiral, but for several other species. Well, the comma and the question mark, the nettles are host plants for those as well. And then at least one other species. So the other problem that we have, of course, with our butterfly populations are going down in general, not just the monarch populations, and that's our systemic pesticides. Unfortunately, a lot of the plants that you grow for okay, I'm almost done. The plants that you buy at the regular nurseries for butterflies have quite often been treated with systemic pesticides. And those systemic pesticides aren't just on the leaves, inside the leaves that the caterpillars could eat, but they find themselves into the nectar. So you buy a nice nectar plant at a nursery plant and bring it home for your butterflies, and it kills your butterflies. So it's very insidious, these pesticides, the insecticides. So
They put these in on purpose?
yeah, they don't want insects to eat them. They want the plants to look beautiful. I want my plants to look like they're eaten all over the place, because I want all these butterflies. And I won't have butterflies unless I have caterpillars. And the caterpillars eat those plants. The nurseries want to sell you plants, and they want to look beautiful. And people don't want plants that look like they're eaten. They want beautiful plants. So, I like butterflies, and so therefore I don't care if my plants look a little big. I'm happy if I find a plant that looks like it's really been chewed on, little holes here and there, I'll start looking for what might be eating it, because that might be some interesting caterpillar. It's a different way of thinking about gardening. And but I threw out the wrong slide. That's okay. That was just an acknowledgement on the photos. Most of those photos were either taken by my husband or by me. So, and I was trying to insert that pesticide slide, and then I ended up throwing out the one with all the, I have to change that. So that's what I have to say. And I had gotten the 5-minute warning, so you know that.
Thank you.
I'll be out there this afternoon if you have questions or if you want handouts. Yes,
This wasn't a question, but you were talking about 2 years ago, how hot it was?
yes.
And we actually got a pipe vine swallowtail
Oh,
on one of our plants that we had. Someone gave it to us and we grew it. I put a trellis up and it grew real big leaves like this. I guess it's called pipe vine, but I'd never seen them there before. And then 2 years ago, when it got real hot and dry, that was the only year I've ever seen. Because I know they're southern species, but that was
right.
the only
I've
year I've
never
ever
actually
seen them
come
there.
across one up here, so,
Pipe vine, yep, that was the only time
yeah.
they laid eggs and they were a bunch of caterpillars everywhere, So
Yeah.
that's really what I saw with the caterpillars.
Yeah,
And then, but I think they're pretty distinctive, I think. Because I looked in the books and everything,
right,
and
right.
they took a picture of them and matched it up, and it seemed like that.
So, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Elsa, for a great presentation. If you'd like to make your way over to the dining hall, that